Hi everyone, welcome to this YouTube channel or welcome back. My name is Levi Cosijn, and in this video I want to talk about the upcoming solar eclipse in the sign of Capricorn, in the tropical sign of Capricorn, which will occur on December 26th, 2019. It's going to be an annular solar eclipse. Annular comes from the Latin word annulus, which means a ring. So the moon will move or will cover the center of the sun, and at its maximum darkest point, right during the eclipse, it will leave a ring of fire. And this is because the moon at that point is the furthest away from Earth, which is called apogee. Right, the moon has an elliptical orbit, so depending on during the year and the month, right, the distance from Earth changes. And so during a solar eclipse, the moon is the furthest away from Earth, and so it appears to be smaller, right? And so because of that, it can leave that ring of fire. It's also interesting because it's the only time, right, during a solar eclipse is the only time that you can actually see the new moon kind of silhouetted against the sun. I have a graph here, a nodes graph. We can see here that the sun, moon, and Earth are aligned, right, perfectly aligned in a straight or near straight line. And of course, whenever there's a new moon happening, because solar eclipses happen always during new moons, and more specifically when the new moon is close to a lunar node, right? And I'm going to explain this in part 2. I already made a video extensively explaining about how the nodes are being formed, their mythology, and some additional information. But here we see the sun and moon and Earth perfectly aligned. The moon is in between the sun and the Earth, and so the moon covers the disk or obscures the rays of the sun, and thus creating a solar eclipse. And then we see here during a full moon when the Earth is between the sun and the moon, right? And the moon is behind the Earth or lies in the shadow of the Earth. This is when a lunar eclipse happens. Now, solar eclipses are dangerous if you watch them without eye protection, right? So be careful. Lunar eclipses are no problem. Here we see the moon, the orbit of the moon around the Earth. This is the Earth around the sun, so the ecliptic. So these two planes are inclined at an angle of approximately 5 degrees. That's the reason why they can intersect. And so where these two planes meet, this is where the nodes are being formed. But I'm going to explain that in the second part. Okay. Astrology is deriving meaning from astronomical phenomena, right? Fundamentally, basically. And we see here that the solar eclipse is happening in the sign of Capricorn, right? I'm going to give a lot of information about Capricorn. I made a video, Jupiter transits through Capricorn, where I elaborate extensively on the sign of Capricorn, both from the Parashara angle, I would say, then, and also the Jaimini angle, right? This is coming from Jaimini Upadesha Sutras, which is one of the oldest references we have about the Rashis. It's very clean-cut, raw, practical information about the signs. We have 6 planets in the sign of Capricorn. We have Mars exactly Rashi aspecting by this green line here. Right? This is signs that aspect each other. Then we have by Anticyon Mercury exactly aspecting. This is a hidden aspect. And these, I made videos about all these things you can find on my YouTube channel, right? What Anticyons and contra-Anticyons are. But these are important hidden aspects, which are very powerful. So Mercury is connected. Saturn rules Capricorn, so right, the solar eclipse is in Capricorn, so Saturn rules the solar eclipse, and Saturn also rules Venus. So we have, in fact, all planets connected to Capricorn. So we can safely say that Capricorn is highlighted. We're going to have a 6 planetary conjunction in the sign of Capricorn. That's a lot of symbology there, right? Capricorn represents an archetype, right? Archetypes are thoughts and images and forms which have universal meanings, right? This is across cultures, times, and they pop up in dreams and visions and, religion and art. The symbols represented in the horoscope, but the planets, the signs, and so on, they're not the archetypes, right? They just point to archetypes because archetypes are the organizing principles. I have a video about the archetypes as such, or the archetypes a priori, and then the expression of archetypes. It's important to understand this, right? That we are deriving meaning, and it's always a kind of a projective system, right? We, as human beings, projected our minds onto the skies. And so we came up with all sorts of, abstractions and mathematics and so on. This enables us to make sense of things because we are experiencing this Earth and this earthly existence. And we were on a spaceship, which is turning around its axis and going around the sun. And then we have the moon revolving around the Earth. I think it's very worthwhile to include a story and myth. It works in practice also to bring understanding and light to our consciousness in order for us to become more aware and also more fulfilled in life. I would like to include ego, right, according to Carl Jung, and also complexes, and talk a little bit about that. Because we're going to have a 6 planetary conjunction, Saturn and Pluto are part of that. Okay, also the south node is there, Jupiter, the sun, and the moon. Okay, the sun and the moon, they form the solar eclipse. It's always happening during a new moon. And then we have Ketu, which is the south node of the moon, which I extensively explain in the second part. Then we have Saturn, the planet of our complexes. Saturn rules the Earth, Saturn rules our mortality, right? The sun and Saturn are diametrically opposing forces. The sun represents our creative vision, the light of consciousness, and our ideology also. Saturn represents our mortality, our limitations. You put these symbols together, it shows some incompatibility, it shows some tension, of course, and I'm going to explain more about the Lajjitaadi avasthas. I think this is worthwhile. Whenever you have a 6 planetary conjunction or a 4 or 5 planetary conjunction, it's always challenging for an astrologer to find out what is actually going on for the person. And I think Lajjitaadi avasthas are an effective way to get more understanding. Lajjitaadi avasthas show the fulfillment of the planet. So here we see Saturn is the planet of our complexes. Now, what are complexes? Complexes are a collection of thoughts, memories, ideas, behaviors, attitudes that focus on one single concept in one single direction. So, for example, when you were young, and let's say people told you that you were stupid, or people told you that you were ugly, right? Because kids can be really cruel because of all these negative connotations and a negative self-image that derives from that. If you have these negative emotions and memories and longings and through dreams and so on, sometimes these can come back through dreams. It touches on, or it touches this complex. A good Saturn is able to resist this kind of things. Saturn shows how strong a person is able to endure pain before succumbing to pain. Whenever Saturn is involved, and the Saturn ruled signs like Capricorn and Aquarius have both water connotations, right? Aquarius, with the man with the jug of water, standing in a pool of water. It's an empty jug, but it's in a pool of water. Well, sometimes it can be a full jug, but the jug is full of water, but there's some texts that give it without. Then Capricorn is, of course, symbolized by the makara, or the crocodile, which is, of course, a creature that lives in water and land. So it has water connotations, which always has a spiritual, emotional connotation. So they're about growth on the psychological, emotional level. I would say more on the psychological level, if we can make that distinction with the emotional, right? Scorpio is more about, really tackling the difficulties of being an emotional being. And these things are triggered, right? When the subject comes to mind, or when it touches through a conversation, then these negative emotions kind of overwhelm us. And the invitation is always, which is what the Saturn signs represent, to become more and more aware of that. And we see that Pluto is also in the mix there. And Pluto is one of these transpersonal planets, one of the hour planets, we say, which relates to Shiva, which is the ego destroyer. Now, what does that really mean, the ego destroyer? Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Mars and Pluto are numerologically related. Mars is the 3rd planet, right? The sun is the 1st planet, the moon is the 2nd planet, the reflection of the soul. And then Mars is the 3rd planet, which is the general, which is exerting what is within the will, what is within the king, what is within the creative vision. Pluto is the 12th planet, which numerologically is also, the number 3. So they are connected. And Mars is, of course, our instinct, the deep primordial instincts, lust, on that level, because we're biological creatures. So keep that in mind. So when Pluto is involved, we say it's the ego destroyer. And then we have Saturn, which is the complex, okay? Or represents and symbolizes these complexes. And often these, the boundaries or the borders between archetypes are not that clean cut. According to Jung, the ego is the complex factor to which all conscious contents are related. So it's the complex factor to which all conscious contents are related. It forms the center of the field of consciousness, which is a complex structure. And thirdly, it is the subject of all personal acts of consciousness. This is how Jung, basically defines the ego. Okay, he wrote many things about it. So we can say, therefore, that the ego is largely responsible for the feelings of identity and feelings of continuity. And this is very interesting, okay? So feelings of identity and continuity. In Vedic astrology, we have the 10th house, which we call Karma Bhava, right? This relates to Capricorn, the 10th sign of the zodiac, you know, which I think has a strong connection to the persona, right? The mask we wear for the world, right? It kind of conceals who we truly are, which is absolutely necessary also. There has to be some kind of distance. But there can also be over-identifying with the mask. And so in Vedic astrology, we have this concept, this is given in Parashara Hora Shastra, a fall from royalty. This is the 5th house. So the 10th house is the house the most visible, right? It's where, you know, it's the house up in the sky, which is the most visible. And so it shows, you know, performing our great deeds. It has to do with your career, right? Your obligations and your responsibilities. The 10th house, the thing that is visible, how, you know, your status in the world and so on. And then, of course, the 8th house is always the weakness of something. The 8th house is the house of weaknesses. It's the house where you work your ego. It's the break of something, right? It relates to Scorpio, as I mentioned before, is where the person becomes very aware of their emotional complexes. So there's some sensitivities, some weaknesses, right? Gemini attributes demons to Scorpio. And so you go deep into the shadow, into the deep unconscious realms of your being, right? And this is where the zodiac shifts. It's the sign next to, you know, where the sun goes under, right? In Libra, right? And so the 8th from the 10th house is the 5th house. So the break from royalty, or Parashara describes that a fall from royalty, is the 5th house. Now the 5th house has a dharma, is one of the dharma houses, which I think is very interesting. But it's also the house of continuity. This is what Parashara gives. It's the house of intelligence, creative intelligence, knowledge, and also continuity. When the mask, right, the personality, the persona falls, then the person falls back into the 5th house. Now the 5th house, also according to Parashara, has to do with shame. Right? So any planet conjuncting Rahu or Ketu, the south or the north node of the moon in the 5th house, gets ashamed. So when you have Rahu, Venus in the 5th house, Venus gets ashamed, or any planets. Now it's also a dharma house, so it means that the person has to go through these complexes. Now you can be willing to accept that, or sometimes these things are so deeply ingrained within us that it's very difficult to surpass these challenges. So now coming back to Pluto. See, Pluto, we say, has to do with compulsion, because it's this also compulsion, these kind of things, and like deep sexual needs, because we're biological creatures, right? There's things we really don't know who we are, right? If we look at the way our psyche works, who we are on the biological level, this is millions of years of evolution of the body. And so Mars is, you know, our hunger and surviving. Like, we protect ourselves, we fight when we are in danger, and Mars makes sure that we have that. These are our primordial instincts. And Pluto has to do with that. You know, Pluto wants to create breakthroughs on a level of energy. Mars is how we direct our energy. Pluto is changing that. So when we say Shiva, destruction of the structure, it means that things that have been deeply ingrained within our brain, like think about addiction, but all sorts of addiction. It doesn't have to be heroin or cocaine. It can be addiction to a person, addiction to a certain feeling, addiction to guilt, for example. It's a big one, right? Addiction to anything that is of that kind, something that is really deeply stuck with us. And so that's why it's such a difficult thing, Pluto, right? Because we think we are beyond these things, but then it turns out that these things have found their way deeply within our being, within our psychology, also within our biology. See, so now Ketu is liberation, right? Ketu is the descending node. It's where, you know, we let go. It's where we surrender to something greater than ourselves also, right? It's, I mentioned the colliding with the submerging with this collective consciousness. Ketu is our ancestral lineage also, it's the past. It's liberation, right? It's eventually, Ketu is where we find liberation because we have been integrating, whatever Rahu represents, which is where we are underdeveloped, right? Which our consciousness needs to go to find, the weapon to come back to the castle, which is Ketu, and destroy the dragon or the demon or whatever it is that is holding you back from evolving in life, right? It's always these opposing forces, these forces of opposition that play out, right, in our consciousness, and we have to live them and really push through to the maximum, to when things actually transmute, change, transform, and so on. So Ketu is liberation. Ketu is where we let go. Ketu gives results of Mars also. When we have Mars also Rashi aspecting strongly, exactly Rashi aspecting the solar eclipse, right? Mars, as I mentioned, are being our energetic system, our instinct, our will to survive and to push through and to fight and to cut cords. Ketu is related to that. It gives the results of Mars. This is what's given in Parashara also. So a Ketu eclipse is where you let go of things. And so when you see Pluto and Saturn there involved, it's about that. It's very much about letting go of psychological complexes. It's power. Pluto has to do also with power, right? Because, often when there's, instincts, and which is often related to sexuality also, and look at how some men act towards women, being all, dominant over women because they're just stronger. These are realities, these are biological realities. And so we have this playing, all these things playing. And of course, when we look at Capricorn and what Capricorn represents, it's about structure. It's about, creating something on the concrete and the material. It's about our material, practical reality and our well-being also. And then Rahu here in Cancer shows, are you aligned to who you truly are? And I make these videos once in a while, and then when I say who you truly are, what does that actually mean, right? Then I'm just thinking about it like, how to make this really clear. And right, this, when you get freed, when you get beyond the complex, when there's true individuation. See, we know that Rahu matures at 42 and Ketu matures at 48, right? That's in between, that is the midlife crisis. And when we also think about individuation process, so becoming mature, that's what it basically means, and aware enough to see the truth of the matter and to also go through life with a sense of responsibility, true responsibility, because you have been working through, and also have you been integrating certain aspects of yourself which were hidden or which were suppressed, or which were lie in the deep unconscious realms of your being, and which were absolutely necessary and constantly inviting you to integrate them. Like for example, the shadow, like that part of yourself that you really don't want to go to, but you have to go to because it has to find some space, that you have to become like a powerful individual, which means that you have to become a little bit of a monster as well at the same time. You can't just run around like a bliss bunny. There has to be some kind of monster quality within you, which you are aware of, which you are not misusing, right? Which you are not letting take a hold of you, but which is there, which is a part of your being also. There's a trine between Uranus and the solar eclipse. The trine is a harmonious aspect. It's a 120-degree aspect, right? These Ptolemaic aspects are all regular polygons, which can be drawn in a circle. So a 120-degree aspect is very conducive. It shows harmony and ease. And so Uranus, being numerologically related to the sun, is going to create breakthroughs on the level of identities. This is a positive and harmonious aspect. And this is an aspect between two earth signs, right, which deals with the material and also with our worth. We have the outer planets strongly involved thus, right? Pluto is strongly connected to Saturn in the same sign there. Uranus is trying the solar eclipse, and we have a loose sextile from Neptune, from Pisces. So the outer planets work as a trinity, right? Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they work as a trinity, and they help facilitate growth, which is indicated by the nodes, right? Especially Rahu. Rahu is where we are in need of development. So Rahu shows this is the place that we're really working. This is the place, the uncomfortable place that we need to travel to find some balance, right? And to integrate that. And so here it's connected to Cancer. Cancer is what we feel, what we need on the level of heart, on the level of mind. Capricorn is the persona, is what our action in the world. So how are these aligned? Are these connected? Are you exactly, or are you expressing what you are, what you want to express? Are you connected to who you are, and thus are able to push forward on the material level and create something new of practical value? Okay, so what do you do when you have a 6 planetary conjunction, right? It's always a challenge for an astrologer to find out what is actually going on, because there's so many things going on simultaneously. And I want to illustrate this. I'm going to limit myself to using Lajjitaadi avasthas, which shows the fulfillment of the planets. This is based on natural friendships, and we're going to use planetary aspects, so aspects based on degrees. So the idea is that, you know, the planets represent the consciousness in the horoscope, right? They are the different facets of our consciousness. The sun is our vision, the moon is the reflection of the soul, so it shows our emotions, our longings. Saturn is our mortality. Venus is relationship, fulfillment, luxury, and so on. So these things, these planets represent things on a concrete level, but also on a psychological level. So when we have these forces, right, so we have the sun, which is our creative vision, we have Saturn, which is our mortality, the identification with the body, the suffering of the ego, right, the pains of the ego. So you see that there's a big difference between those aspects, right, the sun and Saturn. So you put them together in a sign, you make them watch each other. You want to, because when planets are together, when they're looking at each other, when they're gazing at each other, they create an experience to each other. This is the way to look at it. And so their natural way, right, what they are naturally is going to be disturbed. And all these facets, all these aspects want to be fulfilled. They want to express themselves, right? They are parts of our consciousness. So this is a way of finding out how plans can be fulfilled. But and of course, this is not a fatalistic thing. This is just showing some tension. So when you have like a Saturn Sun conjunction, there's going to be some issues with that, most certainly. Through that kind of pain, you learn, you become more mature, you become more aware of who you truly are and what you need to progress and move forward in life. This is what this indicates. Okay, this is a very helpful technique, a very helpful tool. I would say the most helpful I have come across in my studies in astrology. Now, there's some avasthas going on, some conditions going on. I'm going to go over them, right? So I'm looking at this transit as a birth chart, right? So this is ascendant Sagittarius. This is for my location at the time of the eclipse. So, but don't worry about that. We're just going to look at the dignity, at the condition of the planets, using the Lajjitaadi avasthas mainly. So we see that Saturn, for example, is in its own house, in its own sign. So according to Jaimini, right, Jaimini Upadesa Sutra says any planet that conjuncts its own sign becomes manifesting to that sign. This is applying Jaimini's second source of strength. So it becomes manifesting. So on the concrete and the material, Saturn is able to create something, to manifest something to Capricorn, because it's in its own sign there. Then Saturn is starved by the sun. Okay, here we see in the Lajjitaadi avastha screen, we see that Saturn is starved by the sun. This is marked by the 60 red. Saturn is your mortality. It is the thing that is lazy. Why? Because you don't want to spill too much energy. This is what Saturn does. It protects on that account. It's about our survival. The sun is the planet of our vision, is the planet of, you know, the eternal spark. And so when sun looks at Saturn by conjunction here, it's going to create an experience through Saturn that's going to hurt Saturn in fulfilling its tasks most naturally. And there can be like ego battles, strong ego battles, attaching or aligning with things that are just simply not them, for example, or aligning with something that is negative. We also see that the moon is aspecting Saturn negatively. 60 points, it's always on a scale of 60, because the moon is a natural enemy of Saturn. And then we also have Jupiter aspecting Saturn. Jupiter is a friend, of course, because Jupiter is actually neutral towards Saturn, but any planet that conjuncts Jupiter is going to be delighted by Jupiter, right? I also want to mention there's 6 Lajjitaadi avasthas. The first one is Lajjita, which means ashamed. Then we have Garvita, which is proud, this is when a planet is in exaltation or Mulatrikona. We have Kshuddita, which is when a planet is starved, when it's conjunct Saturn. This is also happening here. A planet gets starved, or when it's in an enemy's dignity or an enemy's sign, or when it's aspected by an enemy. This is when a planet is in Kshuddita, which is starved. Then you also have Kshobita, which is when a planet is connected to the sun, is close to the sun. They're combust. So all planets here are combust. Even Mercury is combust. during this period because there's a new moon and they're so close to the sun. We also have Trishita. This is when a planet is thirsted. When this is happening when a planet gets starved, but in a water sign by aspect, only by aspect. So we have these Lajjitaadi avasthas, and Lajjita is the first one. So Lajjita is when a planet gets shamed. I mentioned before that any planet that conjuncts Rahu or Ketu in the 5th house gets shamed. But there's a second rule, and just pull it up here so you can see it. This is also coming from Parashara Hora Shastra. A graha in the 5th, right? Or joining Rahu or Ketu and conjuncting the Sun, Saturn, or Mars, such a graha is spoken of as Lajjita. So here we have Ketu involved with a planet, right? With Saturn and the Sun here in this case, two of these planets that can create shame. And so Moon, Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn are all ashamed, right? It's Saturn and Ketu shame all 3 of these, and then the Sun and Ketu shame all 3 of these. So all planets are ashamed. There's some shame involved. So that's what it is, right? So this solar eclipse is about letting go of shame. It can also produce shameful actions in that sense, right? This is what the symbol shows. Letting go of guilt also, this is all these difficult things, and sometimes we just don't even know where they come from, right? Because Ketu is also ancestral, your ancestral lineage, your ancestors. And if we look at, for example, Native American cultures and where ancestors are so important and they do ceremonies for their ancestors to connect with their ancestors and so on, which is important, right? This is an important, also therapeutic thing. Even, there's accounts of people in ceremonies saying that, it's because of my aunt in, 4 or 5 generations ago was going through this, that I'm also, carrying that, and there's a connection there. So this feeling of there's a deep collective need, a deep connection to the whole, to the collective consciousness also, which connects, which is where the ancestors are part of course, right? Because we come from our ancestors. So again, we have that biology playing. It's always also evolutionary. And so these are things that are important, to focus on when we see this happening, right? We have the Sun combusting many planets. So it is the Sun that is actually doing quite well, all right? The Sun is held by its friend, the Moon. It's also held by Jupiter. Jupiter is debilitated, but Jupiter, in terms of Lajjitaadi avasthas, it's going to give it strength, because any planet has an operational strength to begin with, which is Shad Bala. And if you're interested, you can find all videos on my YouTube channel explaining many things. I also mentioned the Anticyons, right, which is also a video I have with Anthony Lewis explaining very thoroughly where it's coming from and so on. But here we see also that the Sun is connected to Saturn, right? It's in the sign of Saturn. But if we look at the total points of Lajjitaadi avasthas, Sun comes out quite well. Right? It's a good planet, and Venus is also a good planet. I'm just looking at it as a birth chart right here, because I'm looking only at the transits, because if you want to look at your personal horoscope and see how these transiting planets make aspects to natal positions, and to find out how personally it's going to impact you and in what way. Okay, so all planets here are quite neutral. We have Jupiter is a little in the plus, right? We have some shame going on here of all planets. It's not too bad, so it seems, right? So we see that nothing is really going into the red too much, into the negative too much. Just Saturn is strong here, but it's a little weak in terms of Lajjitaadi avasthas, in terms of also the fulfillment of the planets. So whenever you see these combinations, these, like a Saturn-Rahu conjunction or a Saturn-Moon conjunction, it shows where the pressure is on. It shows the area where there's going to be pressure, there's going to be challenge. And of course, it's not a fatalistic thing. It just shows that because under great pressure, the greatest or diamonds are being formed, right? This is an important image, an important symbol also, is that it shows the tension. It shows what kind of tension, what kind of experience is going to be important for you to grow, right? To learn from, and where your ego is attached. Ketu is that, Ketu is about detaching. Ketu shows where we have created a security paradigm. So where we are attached to things, certain outcomes, it has to be a certain way, right? This is what Ketu represents. Rahu says, no, this has to be this way. That's why Rahu connects to foreign things and, you know, unusual things, because it wants to push us out of our comfort zone, right? And to evolve our consciousness, which is going to be difficult, or it's going to bring up insecurity, feelings of insecurity, right? Of course, definitely in Cancer. Cancer is an emotional sign, and it is a sign of our needs, our sense of security, right? If you are strong in who you are, then the chance of you performing and being of practical use for society is much bigger, right? Because you can choose more consciously and so on. Okay, I think this is enough information. So Lajjitaadi avasthas is worthwhile to get into. I'm going to give a course on Lajjitaadi avasthas, or I'm going to do it as a weekend course, which is going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or maybe I do it over a few weeks. So, but if you're interested, you can find all this information on my website, levicosijn.com. Now let's go to the second part. This is a thorough explanation about Rahu and Ketu, the north and south node of the moon, and what they signify astrologically. Don't care too much about the chart that is displayed there on the left side. It's a video that I already made, but really covers a lot of ground about the nodes. And then also I want to mention I co-authored the book Astrology Explained, Ancient Principles for the Modern Mind. It's a 210-page book thoroughly explaining the fundamentals. So if you're interested in astrology or want to deepen your knowledge, you can find this ebook on my website, levicosijn.com. What happens during a solar eclipse is that the new moon moves between the sun and the earth, blocking the rays of the sun and casting a shadow on parts of the earth, right? Parts of the earth, because of course the moon's shadow is not big enough to cover the whole entire planet. Because of the movement, right, of the earth around its axis, moving around the sun, and then the moon going around the earth, the course of the eclipse changes. It looks like the eclipse is traveling. And so it's kind of an interesting phenomena. So it's going to be visible in, on certain parts on the globe, right? You can look that up specifically where you can see the eclipse happen. So I'm going to explain a little bit about how eclipses are being formed. This is Rahu and Ketu, right? The north and south node of the moon. And they're formed by the interaction of the moon revolving around the earth with the ecliptic. The moon, of course, represents the mind, and what the moon is the manas. Through the moon, we experience ourselves subjectively. Okay, so our subjective consciousness is reflected or represented by the moon. The sun, of course, represents the soul, right? That eternal divine spark in each one of us, in all beings. And so when these two Sattvic planets, Sattvic means true essence, connect, when these two planes intersect, this is going to be important, right? So Rahu and Ketu represents the path of our consciousness. It is the axis along which our consciousness travels to evolve, because they're created by the sun and the moon, the path of the sun and the path of the moon connecting. So I'm going to illustrate this with a little graph here. I made this little silly drawing, but hopefully it's going to make things clear. So this is here a representation of the sun. This is the path of the earth going around the sun, right? This is in fact the ecliptic, because if we're looking on earth, it's the apparent path that the sun makes around the earth. Then we also see the moon. This is the moon traveling around the earth. Now, whenever the path of the moon in her travels south, right, meaning entering the southern ecliptic hemisphere, because this is the ecliptic, and you can, look at it as a plane, right? And planes always stretch into infinity. So whenever the moon, the path of the moon, enters that southern ecliptic hemisphere, where it crosses the ecliptic, right? In other words, this is where the south node is being formed. Rahu and Ketu, or the south and north node of the moon, are mathematical points. The south node is also called the descending node, right? Astronomically speaking. So a descension is always connected to letting go of something, right? The death of something. Whenever the moon travels up north, right? Whenever it crosses the northern ecliptic hemisphere, right? This is where Rahu, or the north node of the moon, is being formed. And so Rahu is also called the ascending node. Okay, ascension is also always connected to the birth of something. And as I mentioned, Rahu and Ketu represent the path our consciousness is traveling along. So Rahu represents the birth of individual consciousness, and Ketu represents the death of individual consciousness. and the merging with the collective consciousness. Okay, so Ketu is an indicator of liberation. Moksha is a term which is translated as liberation. And then Rahu, of course, is where we need to evolve, right? Where we need to step into to evolve our consciousness. That's why Rahu, has all these tricky, illusory, difficult connotations. Okay, I'm going to talk also a little bit about that. Okay, so most important thing is that they're being formed by the sun, the soul, and the subjective, the reflection of the soul, which is the moon, and these two main players, sattvic planets, interacting, connecting. Of course, the moon represents our self-image, okay, and the moon is waxing and waning, right? So the moon, that's why, our subjective selves, which includes our memories, our longings, our desires, our emotions, are represented by the moon. And they're waxing and waning. One time we feel good, 2 minutes later we feel bad, another 10 minutes later we feel neutral again, and so on. So the moon is waxing and waning. Of course, the goal of Rahu and Ketu is to unite, the big evolutionary goal is to bring together that fully masculine force, which is represented by the sun, the soul, and the subjective nature of our being, which is represented by the moon, which is the fully feminine planet, okay, to unite those and to become immortal beings. This is what the nodes are helping us evolve towards. Rahu and Ketu are not planets, right? They're eclipse points, but in Vedic astrology, they are referred to as grahas. Graha means seizer, seizing something, so they can seize your consciousness. In fact, one of the names for Rahu is Caesar. So it can grab your consciousness to evolve your consciousness, to get you out of the comfort zone, which is represented by Ketu, where we have created our security paradigm, and which is very strongly connected to our ancestral lineage. So Ketu is very much how you were brought up and so on, the environment you were brought up in, and the development of your consciousness in that environment. And of course, your parents are going to be the closest to that. So Rahu represents where we need to go into. Rahu represents the dangerous jungle that feels very insecure, right? Whatever Rahu indicates in your horoscope, you're going to be very reluctant to actually get into, depending on Rahu's Lord's condition and so on. So, but it is the way to go. Rahu is where we need to develop our consciousness. Rahu is going to create this compulsive need within us to push us out of our comfort zone, to again evolve that consciousness. Okay, so it's going to feel frightening because Ketu is where we have created that paradigm, that security. So Ketu feels secure, but Ketu is where we suppress life energy. Okay, is where we suppress experiencing life fully. It feels secure, but at the same time we create disease there, right? Okay, so depending on these nodes, lords, conditions, okay, the lords of these grahas, it's going to show whether a person is actually capable of evolving that axis sufficiently to become much more fulfilled in life and to get out of the suppression that Ketu represents. Of course, there's also, for example, if Ketu's lord is with Rahu or Rahu's lord is with Ketu, there's going to be different accents. There's going to be a different emphasis. I'm not saying that it's that simple of just looking at lords and then see how this will evolve. You have to look at the whole horoscope, of course. But now there's a very interesting similarity between the path of Rahu and Ketu and the first and seventh house axis. Okay, so Rahu and Ketu is the axis along which our consciousness evolves. And then the first house and the seventh house are the path through which our body evolves, through which we act out our bodily karmas. This is a representation of the earth. So the earth revolves around its axis, right? So the surface of the earth revolves around its core. And where that plane at the time of birth intersected with the eastern horizon, so on your local horizon, so the east point on your local horizon, which is due east, where that plane intersected with the ecliptic, this is determining your first house or the ascendant. This represents the birth of your body, which in Vedic astrology is referred to as the Deha, so the body. And then when you would look due west, which is going to be 180 degrees away from the ascendant, this is representing the seventh house cusp, the death of the body, when the physical karmas are worked through and you just die. They're an axis, right? So the first seventh house is an axis, and then Rahu and Ketu are an axis. Also, if you look at similarities between The seventh house represents foreign countries. Rahu represents foreign countries. Ketu represents the flag, the home, right? And then the first house is, of course, the body, which is, it's where we live. It's the castle we live in. And it is Rahu, the ascending node, that is pointing the way. We need to fully integrate Rahu to attain liberation in Ketu. See, to illustrate this a little further, let's get into the myth of Rahu and Ketu a little bit. See, Rahu and Ketu are, in fact, an asura or a demon called Svarbhanu. Right? And Svarbhanu was one of the demons that got into the line of the devas, or the gods, or the angels. Actually, he positioned himself between the sun and the moon to get the nectar of immortality. And there was a pact between Vishnu, the Lord of all manifestation, and the Devas, because the Devas were losing the battle against the Asuras, and they were complaining to Vishnu. They wanted help, and so Vishnu said, okay, I'm going to make sure that you get the nectar of immortality, right? And in order to do that, you need to work together with the Asuras to churn the ocean. And Vishnu told the Devas, whatever comes out of the churning of the ocean, right, this milky ocean, whatever comes out, the Asuras can have everything. Just wait until the nectar of immortality comes out, and I'll make sure you guys get it. Okay, so the Devas and the Asuras came together, right, and they churned the ocean. They tried that first, but then it kind of failed. And then Vishnu, manifested a turtle, right? And so the turtle just swam into the ocean and became bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it became this huge turtle. And this was born out of Saturn, right? So this turtle was born out of Saturn. But Vishnu is always underlying, right? So everything comes out of Vishnu. So now this turtle was able to lift the earth out of the astral plane. Once that was done, right? So this shows that, Saturn is going to be very important in this whole story, right, of Rahu and Ketu, because it is Saturn that did that work. And so in order for the Asuras and Devas to churn the ocean. And so they did. And Vishnu had manifested himself as Mohini, which was the most beautiful woman. And so what happened is that the Asuras were completely intoxicated by her presence. And so, because, Vishnu wanted to distract the Asuras when he was giving the nectar of immortality to the Devas, right? And so, but there was this one clever, skillful Asura, Svarbhanu, right, which said, okay, this is not, I'm seeing through this. I'm going to just get into the line of the Devas and get their nectar of immortality. And he did, right? The moment that he swallowed a little drop of nectar, the sun and the moon notified Vishnu. And Vishnu took his Sudarshana chakra, right, which is the ecliptic, and cut this demon in two. And the head became Rahu, and the tail became Ketu. What is important is that the Asuras represent our primordial consciousness, right? And the Devas, of course, represent the higher consciousness, our divine consciousness. And, the fact that these guys needed to work together shows that we need the Asuras and Devas together to attain liberation. That's the whole point of this story here, right? So we need that strength, that primordial strength, and that divine consciousness within us to unite and to turn the ocean to get the nectar of immortality, which is liberation. Okay, so Rahu has many names. Dark, for example, Tamas is one of the names of Rahu, because smoky also. So whatever it influences, because we are not experienced there, all right, because we have a strong fear to get into that area, because we hold so much on to Ketu. We create all these fears and illusions and dreams. So there's a lot of fear created, whatever Rahu represents. And Rahu is said to grant wishes, right? So it can give you many things on a concrete worldly level, because it's a very worldly planet, right? Rahu, whatever Rahu represents, you cannot tackle just, by closing your eyes and getting into meditation or something. Rahu is what you need to feel, experience, what you need to taste, what you need to get into fully and live it, right? And through living that, through failing, because Rahu is going to give, this compulsive need within you, compulsive desires. This is coming from your deep subconscious being, because it wants to push you out of your comfort zone. So by creating desires within you, and once you get those things, because it is granting wishes,
then the ego becomes completely disillusioned and not fulfilled deeply. And because the eventual liberation lies with Ketu. So not being fulfilled means that we have to transmute these desires that lead nowhere, also indicated by Rahu, transmuting those desires. One of the symbols for Rahu is also a snake. Snakes are always about transmuting lower desires, desires that are not capable of fulfilling us deeply. So it's a tricky thing. Rahu is a trickster in that sense. It tricks the ego to go after something, and then the ego gets disillusioned because the ego is just completely fragmented. It doesn't see the whole. It just wants to satiate its immediate desire, right? And can be very great desires, right? So if you see like, Rahu is connected to, like insanity, and when you see like rapists and all this heavy stuff, this is when Rahu is acting, because it brings out that deep shadow, that deep primordial aspect of the being. And when it's not mature, when the consciousness, the soul is not mature, it's gonna create serious problems. And then Ketu, the planet of liberation, the planet of moksha. Now Ketu is the most narrow planet, right? It can give a great focus. It can also give great depression, right? And you often see this with people with great breakthroughs. Ketu is where you suppress your life energy, right? Where you feel comfortable. One of the names for Ketu is flag. So it's where you feel accomplished also, where you have planted your flag, where you have conquered something. Castle is also one of the names. So where you feel secure in your behavior, and it can be behavior that is destructive. This is the whole point, right? This is how Ketu can suppress life energy. Ketu, the descending node, it's where we let go, because otherwise it's going to become so narrow, so limiting, so inhibiting, that it can lead to catatonic states and this kind of thing. You see this, right? If you look at, some of the philosophers, Ketu is like this laser sharp intelligence. So it can do great things. It can bring this incredible focus, one-pointed focus. But when it is projected onto something that is wrong or false, then it would create serious problems. We're always talking about Rahu as the, troublemaker. And it is because, see, one of the names for Rahu is also moon troubler, right? Because it eclipses the moon. See, Rahu is said to have a hunger to eclipse the moon, and Ketu has a hunger for eclipsing the sun. And the moon represents our self-image. And whatever you experience in life, whatever you have in your life, if your self-image is not clear, it's not good, right? If you think of yourself as a failure, whatever you have, it's going to prevent you from being happy, right? I'm not talking about this unrealistic, happiness, but I mean, naturally feel happy, like feel at peace with yourself and enjoy living, enjoy getting up, and enjoy going to sleep, and enjoy life very naturally. When the moon is afflicted, and that's why Rahu moon conjunctions are so difficult, because the moon, which represents the mind, the consciousness, subjective consciousness, is troubled by Rahu, right? It shows the need of development, to develop that moon, okay, to develop that consciousness. Especially in a woman's horoscope, it's going to be tough early on in life to feel peace of mind. But these women are, especially in the second half of their life, they have already worked so much on their Rahu position, because the moon is such a pivotal player, that they can make great progress in their consciousness, and they can become really fulfilled in life. In the beginning, serious tumultuous things and serious confusions and peculiar behavior also, right? Whenever you see Rahu moon, you're always going to feel, okay, there's something really peculiar about that expression. Cancer is the original fourth sign of the zodiac, which rules the heart and emotional peace of mind. This is important, right? Because Rahu is in the sign of Cancer as we speak. And so how do you feel about yourself is going to be determining your happiness. How do you feel about and deal with life circumstances is going to determine your happiness. That's why, Rahu moon, Saturn moon conjunctions are very difficult, right? Saturn moon, the mind becomes really detached. There can be a lot of pain, especially in, childhood and young adult life and so on. But eventually, it's also strong spiritual placements because of that, because the moon becomes really detached and is able to know what it needs, right? Because you see, the moon and our needs are fundamental, right, in how we direct our lives. You know, this is the big lesson of Rahu in Cancer, to become emotionally grounded. Capricorn is the sign of action, right? It's the original 10th sign of the zodiac, and the 10th house is in Vedic astrology called the Karma Bhava, which is the action house, and it's an earth sign, right? So earth is always connected to the material, and so actions that are motivated to create material security. Cancer and Capricorn are two movable signs, and movable signs are all about change, or often radical change. So Cancer looks for a new feeling. It's always going to act because of how it feels. Rahu creates this turmoil, this confusion. So the person is not going to feel what he or she needs. And because there's no clarity there, the actions coming out of that are going to be confusing, and they're going to be disturbing, you know, the material, which is represented by the opposite sign here, which is Capricorn. So their actions in the material world are going to be haphazard, not conscious. It's going to create failure there. So for Cancer, Rahu in Cancer, it's super important to become emotionally connected, right, to attune to their emotions and to what they actually need. The emotional need is going to be fundamental in how we direct our lives, right? Capricorn represents the thighs and the upper parts of the knees. So the thigh bone, right, which is the femur, which is the largest and densest bone in the body, which shows that Capricorn can endure, can accomplish a lot, because it is the sign of accomplishment through hard work and perseverance. Capricorn is an earth sign, so as I mentioned, right, connects to material security. It's, you know, creating something on a concrete and a material level. It's ruled by Saturn. See, there's an intimate connection between Ketu, the sun, and Saturn, right? Because I mentioned Ketu has a special hunger, or a hunger for eclipsing the sun, Rahu for eclipsing the moon. You know, because Ketu represents the truth of the matter, right? The avatar that is connected to Ketu was the one that delivered the Vedas to the Lord of, you know, creation, for him to transmit that into the next cycle of creation. The fish avatar, which is connected to Ketu, Meena, right? That's why Ketu in Pisces is considered a spiritual placement. Saturn is a pivotal player. If we look at the myth, Saturn, the turtle, you know, bringing up the earth out of the ocean into concrete manifestation for the devas and the asuras to turn the ocean to get the nectar of immortality, which is liberation. So Saturn, of course, represents our complexes. Saturn represents our mortality. When the moon represents a healthy ego, Saturn represents the pains of that ego. Saturn is our body identification, so it makes us mortal. You know, Saturn rules the earth. Without Saturn, we cannot survive. The sun represents the soul. Ketu represents the truth of the matter. Now, to realize the truth of the matter, we need to incarnate. We need to survive. We need to have a physical body. It helps us endure, persevere the whole Rahu saga, right? So they said that Rahu gives the results of Saturn and Ketu gives the results of Mars, the two malefics, right? The two cruel planets, Krura planets in astrology. So we need a good Mars and a good Saturn. It's good Saturn to persevere through these hardships, because when we're talking about the nodes, we're not talking about, you know, one lifetime. We're talking about a whole cycle of evolution. Saturn represents enduring the pains, becoming psychologically clear, secure, free. Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn is an earth sign. Aquarius is an air sign. But they both have water connotations, right? Because Aquarius is symbolized by, you know, water, and it is depicted as a man with a jug of water. And then Capricorn is also described as the water goer, right? Because Capricorn in Vedic mythology is connected to the crocodile, or the makara, right? So, which is a large aquatic creature. So both Saturn-ruled signs are evolving emotionally. This is very important. And of course, they precede liberation, which will happen in Pisces, right? Which is, of course, a water sign. Becoming emotionally grounded, secure, in contact to what we really need, and to act on that, and to be conscious of why we act, right? If we're not clear emotionally and also psychologically, of course, then how can we create anything of value, of material value also, something that can make us feel secure? Because if it's not connected to your heart, if it's not connected to expressing who you truly are, which is, both connected to Cancer, then it's going to drain you. And this is what Ketu represents, is where you're going to suppress life energy. If you're motivated to act because of mere status and this kind of thing, I'm just giving some, simple examples. Or if you're not in contact with what you truly need, then the whole material dimension cannot be truly fulfilling, and perhaps you're going to depend on that, and it's going to make you feel empty and so on. So this is what Ketu and this whole combo there in the sign of Capricorn represents. Cancer is where Rahu is. Rahu is where we need to develop, okay? A Cancer wants to create a new feeling, wants to feel inspired, wants to go within to find out what it needs to feel fulfilled, to connect to its heart. When you're clear in your emotions, you're clear in taking action in the world as well, which is Capricorn, okay? So this axis, of course, in their extremes, they're always going to act very similar, right? These signs, the sun is being eclipsed, but this is a time to stand still, not to move. Like during the time of the eclipses, it's good to reflect more. It's important to think about and to contemplate about what actions to take. The responsible thing is to connect to what you need to feel nurtured on an emotional level, to become clear, psychologically, emotionally grounded, and from there redirect your actions and move forward with life. Of course, it's going to depend on your personal horoscope, what is actually going to happen, right? So for some people, not much happens. For other people, it's life-changing, because the nodes are always going against the norm, right? The nodes are always retrograde. Rarely they go direct, but most of the time they're retrograde. So they're always going against the norm. They want to create changes, fated changes. So for some people, it can play out like that, and you can see it worldwide. There's always an incredible intensity.
Okay, so have a nice end of the year, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.